The hum of San Francisco International Airport was a familiar symphony to Dr. Simone Reed. It was a soundscape of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the palpable energy of 1,000 different journeys. For her, however, this journey was different. It wasn't for work. It wasn't a last-minute deployment to an audit site or a tense regulatory hearing. This was personal, a long-overdue gift to herself. For her recent promotion, and after a grueling 18-month investigation that had consumed her life, she had planned the kind of trip she always helped make possible for others but rarely took herself, a luxurious 2-week solo escape to Kyoto. She'd booked Seat 1A in the Sakura first-class cabin on Imperial Skyways Flight 8 to Kansai International. It was an indulgence, but one she felt she had more than earned. Simone, at 45, was a woman carved from quiet authority. Her hair was styled in neat, elegant locks, and her simple but well-cut linen travel dress prioritized comfort without sacrificing grace. She possessed a calm, observant demeanor that could be easily mistaken for aloofness. In reality, she was a listener, a woman who absorbed details others missed. For the past 20 years, she'd worked her way up through the Federal Aviation Administration. With a Ph.D. in aeronautical engineering, she was now a senior air carrier safety inspector, one of the people responsible for ensuring that airlines like Imperial Skyways adhered to the letter of every single federal regulation. Her word could ground fleets. She had earned this. The long nights, the missed dinners, the constant travel, it had all been for a singular purpose: to make the sky safer. Now, for 2 weeks, the skies were just for her. She approached the priority boarding lane, her documents in hand. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman, scanned her pass without a second glance. "Enjoy your flight, Dr. Reed." As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the sterile airport air gave way to the climate-controlled atmosphere of the Boeing 787. A flight attendant stood at the door, greeting passengers with a practiced, bowing smile. "Welcome aboard." "Good morning," Simone said, showing her the boarding pass. "I'm in 1A. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Sato, glanced at the pass, then back at her. Her smile didn't falter, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred in her eyes. It was a flicker of something. Reassessment. Confusion. "Right this way," she said, her tone a fraction cooler than it had been for the businessman ahead of her. Simone found her seat, a spacious pod upholstered in deep indigo fabric. It was beautiful, private, and promised a comfortable journey across the Pacific. As she stowed her small carry-on in the overhead compartment, she couldn't shake the feeling of Ms. Sato's gaze on her. It wasn't the attentive look of good service. It felt like surveillance. A few minutes later, Ms. Sato arrived at her pod holding a lacquered tray with a small porcelain cup of sake. Her smile was back, but it seemed painted on, a brittle facade. "Pre-departure sake?" she asked, her voice high and a little too loud. "Thank you, that would be lovely," Simone said warmly. As Ms. Sato handed her the cup, her eyes roamed over Simone again, taking in her simple dress and comfortable flats. She seemed to be searching for something, a clue that didn't fit the picture she had in her mind. "Are you familiar with our Sakura first-class service?" she asked. "I am," Simone replied politely. "Thank you." She lingered for a moment too long. "It's just, we sometimes have passengers who are upgraded at the last minute and aren't sure how everything works. We want to make sure everyone is comfortable." The implication was clear, hanging in the air like stale perfume. "You look like you were upgraded. You don't look like you belong here. You look like a waitress who got lucky." Simone felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest. She'd felt this before, in boardrooms, at inspections, in restaurants. It was the soft bigotry of low expectations, the quiet questioning of her presence in spaces where some people didn't expect to see a black woman. She chose, as she often did, the path of least resistance. "Let it go. This is your vacation." "I appreciate that," she said, her voice even and calm. "I'm all set." Ms. Sato finally retreated, but as she walked away, Simone saw her stop and speak in a low voice to the purser at the front of the cabin, a man named Mr. Tanaka. They both glanced back towards her seat. Mr. Tanaka's expression hardened. The quiet anticipation Simone had felt at the gate was beginning to curdle into a cold dread. This wasn't just a flight attendant having a bad day. This was the beginning of something ugly. The cabin door was sealed, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, a smooth, confident baritone announcing a flight time of 11 hours to Kansai. Simone tried to settle in, to recapture the celebratory mood. She took a sip of sake and attempted to focus on the in-flight magazine, though she could feel the tension in the set of her jaw. The purser, Mr. Tanaka, began his own welcome tour of the first-class cabin. He was a man in his late 50s with a meticulously maintained coif of silver hair and an air of self-importance. He greeted a Japanese businessman across the aisle by name, sharing a brief, hearty laugh. He spent several minutes chatting with an older couple in the row behind them. When he arrived at her pod, the bonhomie vanished. His smile was thin, his posture rigid. "Ms. Reed, is it?" he began, his tone dripping with false civility. He didn't wait for a reply. "I'm Mr. Tanaka, the purser for this flight. I just need to verify your seat assignment one more time." Simone held up her boarding pass. "I'm in 1A. Mr. Tanaka barely glanced at it. "Yes, I see that. It's just that there appears to be some sort of discrepancy in our system. We have this seat marked for another passenger who may have been rerouted. It's a common computer glitch." Simone knew airline reservation systems inside and out. While glitches happened, they were rarely of this nature, and they were almost always sorted out at the gate, not after the cabin was secured for departure. This was a fabrication, and a clumsy one at that. "I can assure you my ticket is confirmed," Simone said, her voice remaining level, professional. "I booked it 2 months ago." "Be that as it may," Mr. Tanaka continued, his voice hardening, "I need to see your ticket receipt. The purchase confirmation." This was a highly unusual request. A boarding pass was the final authority. Simone looked up from her magazine, her expression one of polite but firm disbelief. "Is there a problem, Mr. Tanaka?" "I am simply trying to ensure everyone is in their correctly assigned seat." "Airline policy," he stated. Ms. Sato reappeared at his elbow, a silent, smirking reinforcement. They stood there, blocking the aisle, creating a scene. The businessman across the way lowered his newspaper, watching with unconcealed curiosity. The cabin, once a space of quiet luxury, was now charged with a tense, accusatory energy. "I have already shown you my boarding pass," Simone said, her voice still soft, but now edged with steel. "I also showed it at the gate. If there's a system glitch, perhaps it's something to take up with the ground crew when we land." "I am afraid I cannot wait until we land," Mr. Tanaka said, his patience snapping. He was dropping the pretense of customer service. "There is a possibility you are in possession of a fraudulent boarding pass." The word hung in the air, ugly and venomous. Fraudulent. Simone felt a surge of cold fury, but years of training in high-stakes environments took over. Emotion was a liability. Facts were the weapon. "Mr. Tanaka," Simone said, her voice low and deliberate, "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. I am a ticketed passenger in my assigned seat. You are making a serious accusation without a shred of evidence." A young woman in seat 2G, who had been watching the exchange with growing horror, leaned forward. "For goodness sake, leave her alone. She hasn't done anything." Mr. Tanaka shot her a withering glare. "Ma'am, please remain out of official crew business," he turned back to Simone. "Your receipt. Now. Or I will have to involve the captain." This was the final escalation before the point of no return. Simone knew it. She was being challenged, tested, and deliberately humiliated. The accusation wasn't about a computer glitch. It was about the fact that she, in the minds of Mr. Tanaka and Ms. Sato, could not possibly have afforded or deserved to be in first class. She had to be a fake, a fraud, or the beneficiary of some mistake that needed correcting. Simone pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly. She wasn't flustered, she was methodical. She opened her email and found the booking confirmation from Imperial Skyways, complete with the transaction ID and the last 4 digits of the credit card used for the purchase. She held the phone out to Mr. Tanaka. "Here is the confirmation email from your airline, sent the day I purchased this ticket. As you can see, it is fully paid for. Now, are we finished with this interrogation?" Mr. Tanaka glanced at the phone, his face flushing. The clear, digital proof momentarily thwarted him. He had expected her to have no answer, to become flustered and angry, to give him the excuse he needed. But her calm, factual response only seemed to infuriate him more. He couldn't accept that he was wrong. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hiss. "I don't know what game you're playing. Maybe you used a stolen credit card. Maybe you are an employee trying to pull a fast one. But this flight does not move until I get to the bottom of this." Ms. Sato chimed in, her voice saccharine with malice. "We have to protect the integrity of the cabin, Mr. Tanaka. We can't have, well, you know," the unfinished sentence, filled with their shared prejudice, was the final straw. It was a direct, undisguised insult. Simone slowly placed her sake cup on the tray. The time for de-escalation was over. They had crossed a line. "Mr. Tanaka, you have 2 options," Simone said, her voice now devoid of any warmth. It was the voice she used when grounding an aircraft. "You can return to your duties, and we will discuss your conduct with your superiors when we land. Or you can call the captain, as you threatened. But understand this, if you choose the second option, you will be initiating a sequence of events that you will not be able to control." It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, a professional assessment of the situation. Mr. Tanaka, blinded by his own arrogance, heard it only as a challenge. His face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. "Oh, I'll call the captain. We'll see who is in control here." He turned on his heel and strode purposefully toward the cockpit, Ms. Sato trailing him like a loyal viper. The cockpit door opened, and Mr. Tanaka emerged, his face flush with vindication. Behind him was Captain Albright. The captain was the picture of authority, tall, silver-haired, with 4 gold stripes on his epaulets. But as he approached her seat, his expression was not one of impartial investigation. It was one of annoyance, of a man whose routine had been inconveniently interrupted. He wasn't there to listen. He was there to solve a problem created by his crew. And the easiest solution was to remove the source of the friction. "Ma'am," Captain Albright began, his voice carrying an easy, dismissive authority. He didn't make eye contact, instead addressing the space beside her. "I'm Captain Albright. My purser tells me there's some confusion about your seating." "Captain, there is no confusion," Simone stated clearly. "There is, however, an accusation of fraud being leveled against me by your crew. I have shown my boarding pass and my purchase confirmation. I am in my assigned, paid-for seat." The captain finally looked at her, but his eyes were cold, unreceptive. He had already made his decision, siding with his crew before hearing a single word. "Look, I don't have time to sort out ticketing disputes on the tarmac," he said dismissively. "My purser, Mr. Tanaka, is responsible for the integrity of the cabin manifest. If he says there's a problem, there's a problem. We have a schedule to keep." Simone leaned forward, her voice sharp and precise, the voice of an inspector delivering a difficult finding. "Captain, are you saying you are refusing to look at my legal documentation? That you are taking the unsubstantiated word of your crew over documented proof?" "What I'm saying, ma'am," the captain retorted, his tone becoming patronizing, "is that this discussion is over. The safety and security of this flight are my paramount concern. A disruptive situation in the cabin before we even take off is a security concern." "I am not being disruptive," Simone said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I am sitting in my seat, being harassed. That's a matter of perspective, Captain Albright said, crossing his arms. My crew feels threatened. You've become belligerent. It was a masterful, insidious trap. By calmly defending herself against baseless accusations, she was now being labeled as the aggressor. So, here's what's going to happen, the captain continued, his decision final. I'm going to have to ask you to deplane. You can sort this out with the gate agents. They'll get you on the next available flight once your ticketing is verified. The humiliation was absolute. It was a public verdict, delivered by the ultimate authority on the aircraft. She was being declared guilty and sentenced to removal. Captain Albright, Simone said, her voice now resonating with an authority of its own, though the source of it was still unknown to everyone in the cabin. I want you to be very sure about this. You are invoking your captain's authority under Federal Aviation Regulation 913 to remove a paying, ticketed passenger based on the unverified claims of your crew. Is that correct? The specific citation of the regulation gave the captain a moment's pause. It was an unusual thing for a passenger to know. But his pride and his blind trust in his crew overrode any flicker of caution. That's correct. Now, are you going to leave peacefully, or do I need to call for airport security? Slowly, with a dignity that stood in stark contrast to the ugliness of the situation, Simone stood up. She retrieved her bag from the overhead compartment, her movements deliberate and unhurried. As she started the long walk back up the aisle, Mr. Tanaka and Ms. Sato stood near the galley, arms crossed, their expressions triumphant. They had won. They had identified the imposter, the person who didn't belong, and they had purged her from their silver sanctuary in the sky. As Simone stepped onto the jet bridge, the cabin door closing behind her with a final, definitive thud, she was no longer a vacationer. She was an inspector at a crash site, piecing together the chain of events that led to a catastrophic failure. This failure wasn't mechanical. It was human, and it was every bit as dangerous. Back in the terminal, the gate agent who had checked her in earlier looked up, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Ma'am, the flight's closed. What happened? Before she could speak, the agent's phone rang. He listened, his eyes darting towards her. Aha. Okay, Captain, I understand, he hung up, his demeanor now cold and official. Captain Albright informs me you were removed for being disruptive. I need to rebook you. The next flight with an available first-class seat to Kansai is in 2 days. I was not disruptive, Simone said calmly. I was targeted and harassed by the crew. Look, ma'am, all I know is what the captain tells me, the agent sighed. I can offer you a hotel voucher and meal coupons. He slid the vouchers across the counter, a dismissive gesture meant to end the conversation. Simone calmly took out her phone. She ignored the vouchers. She took a deep, steadying breath. I won't be needing those, she said quietly. She turned away from the counter, scrolled through her contacts, and stopped on a number labeled FAA Duty Officer, WR. She pressed the call button. The phone was answered on the second ring. FAA Western Region Duty Office, Agent Miller speaking. Simone's voice when she spoke was transformed. The weary traveler was gone. In her place was FAA Inspector Simone Reed, badge number 814B. Agent Miller, this is Inspector Reed. I need you to listen to me very carefully, she said, her tone clipped and official. I am at San Francisco International, Gate G9. I have just been unlawfully deplaned from Imperial Skyways Flight 8, ICAO designation ISW-8, a Boeing 787, tail number JA-873A. There was a pause, then the sound of frantic typing. Inspector Reed, ma'am, confirmed. What is the nature of the incident? The flight crew, specifically Purser Tanaka and flight attendant Sato, refused to accept my valid, ticketed boarding pass for seat 1A. They accused me of fraud without cause. When I presented digital proof of purchase, they escalated their harassment. I was subsequently removed from the aircraft by the pilot in command, Captain Albright, under a false pretense of disruptive behavior. The captain refused to verify my documentation and cited crew safety as the reason for my removal. Simone paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Agent Miller, I am officially declaring this a discriminatory incident in direct violation of Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 40127, prohibiting discrimination by air carriers. Furthermore, the captain's failure to perform due diligence before removing a ticketed passenger constitutes a gross neglect of duty and a potential violation of the carrier's operating certificate under 14 CFR Part 121-inch. The agent was audibly stunned. My God, ma'am. Understood. What are your instructions? I want you to immediately contact the Principal Operations Inspector for Imperial Skyways. I want a full transcript of the cockpit voice recorder from the moment the purser entered the cockpit to the moment the cabin door was closed. I want the names and FAA certificate numbers for the entire flight crew. I want the airline to preserve all internal cabin security footage. I will be filing a formal report. Consider Imperial Skyways San Francisco operations under immediate and intense scrutiny. We are initiating a full compliance investigation, effective immediately. Simone concluded the call. The power dynamic had shifted with a single phone call. She was no longer a victim of the system. She was the system itself. She walked back to the counter, her face a mask of cold resolve. She held up her federal credentials. The gold FAA inspector's badge gleamed under the harsh terminal lighting. My name is Dr. Simone Reed. I am with the Federal Aviation Administration, she said, her voice flat and hard as granite. Your flight crew, and your airline have a very serious problem. You will not be rebooking my flight. You will be securing my luggage, which is currently on a plane that is about to push back from the gate. You will then find your station manager and a representative from Imperial Skyways corporate office, because they need to be here to meet with me. Now. The gate agent stared at the badge, his face turning pale. He saw her now not as a disgruntled passenger, but as one of the most powerful regulators in the aviation industry. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am, the vacation to Kyoto was officially cancelled. A federal investigation had just begun. At 37,000 feet over the Pacific, the crew of Flight 8 was oblivious. In the forward galley, Ms. Sato and Mr. Tanaka were quietly congratulating themselves. You handled that perfectly, Mr. Tanaka, Ms. Sato said. She was so sure of herself. The arrogance. It's always the way, Mr. Tanaka agreed with deep satisfaction. They think they can bully their way in. But we must maintain standards. Captain Albright saw it right away. He knew she was trouble. In their minds, they were heroes who had defended the sanctity of their premium cabin. They settled in for a quiet flight, completely unaware that on the ground below, an inferno was erupting, and they were at its epicenter. Their reckoning arrived in Kansai. As the Boeing 787 taxied to the gate, they anticipated a pleasant layover. But when Mr. Tanaka opened the cabin door, he was met not by ground crew, but by two stern-faced men in dark suits and Evelyn Reed, Imperial Skyways Vice President for North American Operations. Her expression was arctic. Mr. Tanaka, she said, her voice dangerously calm. Keep the passengers on board. You, Ms. Sato, and Captain Albright will come with me. Now. In a windowless briefing room, Evelyn Reed wasted no time. At approximately 11:35 p.m. Pacific Time last night, you removed a passenger from Flight 8. I want you to tell me exactly what happened. Captain Albright, still radiating an aura of command, was more annoyed than concerned. It was a minor security issue, Evelyn. A passenger was being disruptive, harassing the cabin crew over a ticketing issue. I made a command decision to deplane her. Evelyn's gaze shifted to Mr. Tanaka. Tell me why you believed her ticket was fraudulent. Well, he began, his tone self-assured, she just didn't seem to fit the profile of our typical first-class clientele. It was a gut feeling, based on my 25 years of experience. Evelyn Reed felt a surge of nausea. Gut feeling. Profile. They were openly admitting to discriminating. The passenger you removed, she began, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, was Dr. Simone Reed. The names meant nothing to them. Perhaps you know her by her title. The woman you accused of fraud and labeled a threat is FAA Senior Air Carrier Safety Inspector Simone Reed. Her work is the foundation for half of our crew training manuals. The color drained from their faces. The disruptive passenger you ejected, Evelyn said, hitting every word like a hammer blow, is, for all intents and purposes, the federal government. And you committed a series of flagrant violations of federal law in front of a cabin full of witnesses. While you were serving drinks over the Pacific, Inspector Reed was initiating a full-scale federal investigation into this airline. Your FAA certificates have been flagged. Your careers, as of 9 hours ago, are effectively over. The fallout was a slow, crushing avalanche. Ms. Sato and Mr. Tanaka were terminated, their FAA certificates revoked. Captain Albright was suspended, his command stripped away, and ordered into exhaustive retraining, his career permanently hobbled. Imperial Skyways was hit with a multi-million-dollar fine and forced into a consent decree with the FAA, mandating a complete overhaul of their training protocols. In a move of profound poetic justice, the FAA appointed an external consultant to design and approve the new curriculum, Dr. Alana Reed. 6 months later, Simone finally took her anniversary trip. She flew a different airline. As she settled into her first-class seat, the flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Reed. Can I get you a glass of champagne?" There was no hesitation in his eyes, no flicker of suspicion, just professional courtesy. The ordeal had cost her a dream vacation, but it had fueled her life's mission. Her personal pain had been forged into a powerful instrument of change. What her tormentors on Flight 8 forgot is that true authority isn't found in a title or a captain's stripes, but in integrity, truth, and the quiet dignity with which you carry yourself. They thought they were kicking off someone who didn't belong, but they ended up kicking open the door to their own destruction and forcing an entire industry to look in the mirror.